This is Saxophone Talk by Eastman, a show that features many of the prominent saxophonists in the musical scene, with an opportunity to hear their stories, experiences, and challenges that occurred throughout their musical careers. I'm Roger Greenberg, saxophone specialist for Eastman. On this show, we're sitting down with saxophone and woodwind artist Bob Sheppard. Bob has played in the bands of Freddie Hubbard, Chick Corea, Steely Dan, Michael and Randy Brecker, Mike Stern, Herbie Hancock, Billy Childs, Lyle Mays, and many more. He has also performed with Joni Mitchel, Diane Reeves, and is a busy Los Angeles studio musician who has played on over 100 movies and TV shows. Bob is an active clinician and educator and is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Southern California Thornton School of Music.
I started out on the clarinet. I wanted to be a drummer, but my father was a saxophone clarinet player, sort of an amateur moonlighter sort of a guy, and he brought home a clarinet one day when I was 9 or 10, and that was the beginning of my path. So the clarinet, he didn't feel he was qualified to teach me, so he took me to a local studio where it was all clarinets and all accordions. There was a lot of these places on the northeast that there were Italians and Jews, and they all wanted to play clarinet or accordion. So that was my first private study, and of course that the school systems back around Philadelphia when I was young, they all had wonderful music programs going on. So I had lessons in school as well. I wish I had a memory that could actually, point these people out. But the one guy that was very influential for me was the gentleman from the Philly Work, Mr. Ciccarelli.
It's interesting hearing about the accordions, and of course, saxophones and accordions were very popular in Philadelphia for the string bands, the Mummers Parade.
That too, yeah. It was. I never thought about it until much later. How there were all these accordion and clarinet schools around, and so anyway, that was my beginning. And of course, someone told me about this word called autodidactic. An autodidact is what I am. I sort of, in a large part, taught myself. Not classical clarinet. Someone I really thought of myself as a classical trained clarinet player when I started to get better at it. My interest in playing music was picking up the horn and trying to figure stuff out on it, and in that way, I guess that sort of led to my. There was not enough time for a teacher to teach you. Yeah, it was more like for me like picking up the horn and trying to get to it as much as I could because I liked it, right? So in a lot of ways, I heard the music and I went after it, let my ear teach me. But so I didn't have like a ton of teachers along the way to my detriment, I'm sure. But from my own experiences, like I could point out a few people that were important to me along the way. But I have friends of mine that could literally point out every teacher that they had, and it's just that wasn't my experience.
Were you playing saxophone at that time?
I started saxophone 7th grade in junior high. So, I was already playing clarinet for a few years. And then there were jazz bands, big bands in school. So my father was, wanted me to, those records were on in my house, big band records and all kinds of jazz records were in the house, so it was just a natural, path that for me, no, it's saxophone. Well, I'm going to obviously start playing the sax. But even at that point, I didn't have a saxophone teacher. I just started, fiddling around on it until I did get a teacher at one point. But local guy, he was fantastic. He guided me a little bit. And there was a few people that were instrumental in guiding me, but I didn't have a lot of study, even as far as like years of concentrated private lessons. Just they were sort of intermittent.
What were your first gigs?
Oh boy, I can remember one, but my first gig actually, my father had to drive me to it. It was a bar. It was sort of a roadhouse, what we call those, up in New Hope, Pennsylvania. It was a tavern and I don't know how I got the job, but it was with a couple of guys much, much older than me. I was probably, I don't know, I was probably in 10th, 11th grade. And it was at a place that was just a bar and a restaurant, and with a quarterbox player and a drummer. And I was scared to death. And my dad sat on the bar stool about 10 feet away, watched me sort of like try to get through this job.
Where did you go to college, and who did you study with in college?
My father wanted me to practice every day, and he always came home from work and asked me if I practiced today. And but ultimately, they wanted me to become a doctor, or lawyer, or dentist, or something, right? So my first college was a pre-med course of study. Rider College was called. It was near Princeton, and but I used to go home and practice my alto and tenor, play along with Cannonball and train, and basically almost flunked out of that. So I changed my major and I went to a community college, Bucks County Community College, to raise my grade point average, which turned out to be very good for me because there was a theory teacher there, Jerry Nowak, yeah, excellent theory teacher. And I learned a lot of harmony, and then I transferred to Glassboro State College, which is now Rowan University, and that was very important move for me because I met a lot of really talented players at that school, and I met Manny Album, the famous arranger and composer, who was sort of visiting.
Was he teaching there?
He came as a guest lecturer, and he became he was very important to me. He actually was the person who suggested I go to Eastman for my Eastman School of Music for my master's degree because they had a new jazz program there. So, but I was playing gigs all over Philly. By the time I was in 11th grade, I was in different bands. I was that was my education is actually playing gigs. Like most of my friends, we learned on the job. We would go out and play these gigs, and then step on it, and we go home and get the records and figure out not how to just to correct ourselves. We wanted to go back and play better. That was like that was the cycle of like playing gigs and like, oh man, I sucked on that. I'm not going to do that again. And then we'd go home and get the records, and then we come back, and because we wanted the gig, we wanted to be hired back, right? So the idea of studying your horn and then practicing along with records, and then going out and playing gigs. This was that was the commonplace thing from all my friends actually at the time that were interested in music.
You played for some of the giants in the musical world, including Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Tony Bennett, and the Tonight Show band with Johnny Carson. What was that like?
Well, when these kind of questions come up because you have a resume, you have a credit list, and you put them down in whatever order of importance. And so for people like yourselves and out there love to read that stuff. But it, when looking back on it, you don't ever know what you're going to be doing, right? It's all because of the gig that you did before and the person that you met before, right? So they were all uniquely. There's a story and a feeling behind all of these kind of gigs, and when you're there for the first time, you go like, "Oh wow, this is pretty wild. How did I get here?" So part of that question is deeply rooted in like, wow, I see there's this little plant, this little tree that just starts growing, and you don't know where the branches are going to lead. And all of a sudden, I found myself moving to Los Angeles. I never expected to be in Los Angeles. I was always going to be moving to New York, but circumstances, as it were, I ended up in L.A. and playing on the Johnny Carson show, like subbing on the Johnny, was wild. Like, what am I doing here? I grew up. My father and mother, had that show on every night in our house, and then all of a sudden I was playing da 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 da, and I go, wow, this is crazy. How that happened? So that experience and these kind of experiences are unique, and they seem to happen like in an organic way. They don't happen by chance. They happen because of everything that you've worked for beforehand, of course. So it's a hard question to answer because each one of those gigs comes from a different set of circumstances that came before, and if I were to trace the etymology of each gig, it's because of I played with these guys. This guy heard me here with this band, and before that, there's a natural sort of path that happened before you got to those gigs, and so when you're there, looking back on it in retrospect, you just go, wow, I guess I did do all those things, but they were very much not, they weren't planned. I think people get. Young players have to understand that, that looking at someone's resume and say, man, I want to do that. I want to play on American Idol. I used to do American Idol. Like it was just a gig for me, I'm playing with Freddie Hubbard, and now that was something, right? So some of these gigs are, in terms of importance, were more grandiose than others. Let's say they're all part of the mix of what I've done, but some of them are definitely had more impact on my life than others. So I don't know how to characterize that.
When you think of Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. and Tony Bennett, you're thinking of people with very high expectations. Did they ask for a lot from the band?
The expectations are always there, and the level is very high, and so the playing with Frank Sinatra was like something I never thought I would ever do, and I was pretty young at that point, and it was one of the most exciting things I've ever actually done because people. I've never felt such energy and just people going absolutely crazy for saying Frank Sinatra. It was thrilling. It was electrifying when he came on stage, but and swinging like all hell. And he was in his, he was older at that point. He was starting to forget a few lyrics, but he was still just absolutely incredible. So that was amazing. That was amazing. Some of these gigs that you could list are short-lived. I probably did that over the course of 3 or 4 months, the Sinatra thing. Tony Bennett, I still once in a while get called to play behind Tony Bennett, but I'm not really in his band. People read that and they think so, but it's always a pleasure, like playing, getting called to do these kind of things because the musical level is so high.
Mm-hmm. And all this came about when you moved to Los Angeles. And what made you move to Los Angeles?
Well, actually, I played with Tony Bennett in a dinner theater in Rochester. When I went to Eastman, I was lucky enough to sit next to Joe Romano, who played lead alto. It was like a big band, who we played major acts like Tony Bennett and all the time. So that was my first time I did that. But these moving to L.A. was the product of a friend of mine at Eastman who had a record deal out here. John Sterry, his name was. And he said, I was teaching at Loyola University in New Orleans, and I told myself I was only going to do that for a couple years and save up some money and move to New York. So at the time, a lot of friends of mine from Eastman were moving to Los Angeles. And so I ended up out here. I was never west of Harrisburg, literally, so it turned out to be a very fortuitous move. Because once I came out here, I started playing with Toshiko Akiyoshi, Lutabak, and big band. I was doing lots of different big bands, meeting a lot of different players, and I met Billy Childs very early on, and he suggested I come down and sit in with Freddie because he was looking for a tenor player, and so that sort of kept me here. Good things started happening to me, and at the same time, I was meeting a lot of players, and there was a lot of session work. There was a lot of recording sessions on different levels, and I just naturally, because I could read and I could double, I played clarinet and flutes and all the saxes, and I could solo, and so LA sort of was a good place for me to come because I could put a lot of different hats on and work and make a living.
This is when you met up with and joined the Freddie Hubbard band. How did that come about?
Well, as I said, I met Billy Childs at a little gig called Come Back In Venice Beach, and he heard me play, and he was playing with Freddie Hubbard, and he said, you should come down and sit in at this gig at the Parisian Room, and which is no longer there. It was like a club down in central LA, and I didn't know it was going to happen, but I sat in, and I never knew if I actually got the gig. I was never officially hired, but I kept getting called back. Freddie never had a steady band. He had an East Coast band. He had a West Coast band. But over the course of a good 7 years, I played with Freddie. Went to Europe 2 or 3 times. Played a multitude of gigs with Freddie and over a span of those years, and which was, talk about a learning experience. That was frightening and the most thrilling thing that I ever did.
Was it a breakthrough? Do you consider it a breakthrough as a creative working musician?
I think for my jazz, I was always a person that wanted to be the best jazz player I could be, and that was my main focus always. At the same time as trying to make a living playing all kinds of different gigs. I was never just a jazz musician, just the way I grew up. I just wanted to make a living and wanted to play my horn. I really liked doing studio work. I liked being the craftsman part of a musician. I really enjoy that part as well. So, but when I started playing with Freddie, that sort of really gave me, I think, some credibility, in this little jazz world that's that you always want to do that, but you never expect that that's gonna be your ultimate thing to make a living, I grow up in a middle class background, and my father says, "Man, so you're going to be a musician, you better figure out how to pay the rent." So that was just me. But so when the Freddie Hubbard gig came along, that was quite something that boosted my confidence, I suppose, and made me work harder because I wanted to keep that gig, and I wanted to play well for him and play. And then when you're going on stage with a guy like Freddie Hubbard, that's a surreal thing for a guy like me.
Did he allow you to open up and be
Oh,
yourself?
absolutely. That's what he was all about. And when it's time to play, you better deliver something, and you have to do it on a level that I suppose is acceptable to him, right? So I think Freddie found me fitting a style because I was very much influenced by Joe Henderson and post-trained sort of a player. And at the time in LA, there wasn't a ton of players that had that. It was a different. There was a lot of more, I don't know, like fusion sort of funk jazz players, or cool style West Coast players, and I sort of had this East Coast, if you will. I hate defining these things like that, but I was more in that style, and I think I was lucky. I think if I moved to New York, I might have never got a chance to play with Freddie Hubbard. So that was very, very lucky for me to have that experience.
You also were playing studio gigs for TV and motion pictures. Could you mention some of the composers and the music that stand out?
Well, there were so many composers writing movies in their home studios, but the big sessions going down to MGM or now Sony or Fox and things like that. Those sessions were very, very demanding as far as you just never knew what was going to come at you, but some of the composers that I really enjoyed working for that had that just wrote beautiful music, and they were fun, like guys like Randy Newman. There were guys like Mark Isham that used me in quite a few really big movies, and I worked for quite a few composers that Alan Silvestri and these people were amazing. Just the level of musicianship in these sessions. I learned so much from just sitting in a woodwind section next to the best musicians in the world, and it was what lesson that was. It really. And continue to do that. Not to that work is a lot less than it used to be in LA, but I would say that experience was continues to be quite demanding and fulfilling when you get a composer. We did a session for John Williams once. I only worked for him one time, but boy, that was absolutely amazing to play with an orchestra like that. So these, I've been very lucky to have this sort of diverse musical, work come by me.
I hear that John Williams was a kind of composer who would sometimes not even use the click track and take a lot of freedom and seem to make it work out.
Well, he's amazing. Actually, the movie that I did was off click, no click for that. Totally on the stick, as we say, and as a saxophone player, basically a jazz guy, that's pretty scary, But then you just sort of, you either sink or swim.
You played in many different styles, from straight ahead jazz to pop, rock, R&B. You talked a little bit about this, but could you talk about the challenge of switching gears for all of the different musical styles?
Sure. Yeah. I think first of all, that's something that I did from the time I started playing, in bands when I was a kid. Literally, I was of course, I was always in some doing weddings, like, because that was just a good way to make money. And so in wedding bands, I don't know how many thousand weddings I did, you played every style, right? You had to. That was part of what a wedding was. I was in funk bands. I was in soul bands. I was in Latin bands. Uh, you know, I did all kinds of stuff. So for me, like playing styles was something I grew up with, right? So as I got lucky enough to start working in really high level gigs, that was just normal for me to switch gears. So as a saxophone player, or they're just styles, and each style comes with its own characteristic sound approach and time approach and vocabulary, right? So it's sort of like knowing different dialects of a language, So that's for me. I'm sure that's what prepared me to be able to do these varied styles and varied gigs that demanded knowledge of the dialect. So my background as a young player, I think, was my teacher.
Did you switch mouthpieces for different styles?
I did. Well, if you were to come to my studio, as you probably would go to most doublers, saxophone players' studios, you would have drawers full of mouthpieces, right? So yes, I certain gigs, especially when I moved to LA, I really had a few different setups that I knew that would have give me a certain sound that they were looking for. When I first moved to LA and started doing sessions, they wanted Sanborn alto sound, right? And I had to learn how to do that. I have something I couldn't really get that sound, and I had to buy those records and find a mouthpiece that was sort of got closer to that. I was a person that really liked the idea of trying to copy. That studio musicians were about giving the employer what they needed, the producer, the writer, what they were looking for, right? Not so much your own identity, and that's fun too. That's what I really prefer to do if they call me to sound like me, right? But for a large part of it was like trying to sound like something they wanted. You're supplying them with something that they wanted, and you had to get what they wanted, or else you were going to get called back. So yes, I did have different setups for different things, for sure.
And you were playing clarinet, flute, and saxophone. What about the challenges of doubling?
I get this question a lot, especially when I go out and do clinics. For me, it wasn't practicing doubling. It was more about taking each instrument and trying to make that sound like your main instrument, and trying to flute is the clarinet I started on, so I could always pick up the clarinet and sort of feel fairly confident on. Saxophone, no problem, but flute really is something that I need to be sure I practice, because the concept, getting the sound concept and the control was that came later for me, right? So that really demands like attention.
Did you have certain people that you listened to try to emulate sound?
Absolutely, you emulate the best.
For
right?
example,
you play along with the records, right? The guy that really turned me around for my flute embouchure was a teacher at Eastman School of Music. John Thomas, his name was, and he really sort of got me my embouchure to a point where I understood the concept, right? I sort of like wasn't just going at it from a saxophone player's point of view and airy sound and all over the not being confident of being able to get the high notes out, et cetera, et cetera. So playing along with great orchestral type records, just and then trying to lock in with it was a great. I still do that. I still play along with recordings. Not anybody in particular, just something that I could lock in with. I'll open up a sonata or something like that and play along, and try to just get right inside the player's sound and the pitch but doing maintenance on these instruments is very important, and knowing how the sound is produced. I tell students all the time. They'll say, "What's the first thing?" They come in and say, "What's the first thing that you do?" Well, I played 20 minutes of long tones, but they're playing with an incorrect embouchure, so they're just inculcating the wrong stuff, right? They're doing themselves a disservice, right? So it's not how you practice. It's not what you practice. It's how you practice, which is the most important thing. So, and I'm a student. I know I'm going to be a student for the rest of my life because I'm interested in how it's done. The chain of events that produce the sound. And anybody that I know that's a really great player, they're doing the same type of thing. They're always listening to themselves and trying to get better.
What was your first album as a leader?
It was a record called Telltale Signs, and that record happened because I was playing with Randy Brecker at Catalina Bar and Grill. This is quite some time ago, the original Catalina Bar and Grill, and Walter Becker of Steely Dan fame came in and heard me play, and because of that instance, he hired me to do a Ricky Lee Jones record and some gigs, and he was producing her. And then he said, "Hey, you want to let me produce a record for you?" And that was my first record on. It was at the time was Windham Hill Jazz.
And after that, as a leader,
I'm not a very prolific person. I only have about 4 records out, but that was another record called In the Now, which was a quartet record with some friends of mine.
It seems like you play a lot of tenor when you're playing with your own group, but when you play with a big band, you're playing lead alto. Is this something you just fell into, or is it a preference?
Again, it's what I've always done. Right? When I first moved to, I was mainly more of an alto player. I was considered more of an alto player when I first moved to LA because I was playing big bands on alto and Toshiko's band on alto, and I love playing lead alto. I always did, and people heard me do that, and they liked what I did. So if I was going to do a big band, I would prefer to play lead alto. But if not lead alto, I would want to play solo tenor. So people know you from what the last gig you've done and how they heard. I have people that just think I'm a clarinet player because that's all they know. They don't know me as anything else. Some people know me as just a tenor player. It's really funny how people identify you and pigeonhole you. But for later in my career, I started playing more tenor out in jazz gigs and especially playing with Freddie Hubbard but Billy Childs, for instance, who he doesn't use tenor that much. He likes soprano and alto. So it depends. Like I love playing them all. When I play with Bob Mintzer's band, I'm playing lead alto. Other bands I play tenor. It's just the nature of my background because I like playing them all, and I try to do my best on get a good sound on all of them. So.
As an educator, you've been teaching at USC for a number of years. What classes are you teaching?
At USC, I'm an adjunct, a private instructor. So I was teaching some combos a few years ago, but right now I'm solely just a private instructor, and I really enjoy that.
Mostly saxophone?
Saxophone, jazz saxophone. And it's never just jazz saxophone because it's, there's some basic stuff that a lot of these young players come in. There's a lot of gaps. So, but it's one of my joys. I really love teaching.
You talked a little bit about your learning history. Could you talk about street learning versus college pedagogy?
Well, that's a big topic, actually. They're all big topics, but my generation, we got the music. It was a self pursuit of the music. There was a drive that was a natural part of how we all learned from the guys that came before us. Right? It was there was a reverence for the history and the skills. So that was sort of passed down. And there was a lot of opportunity to get experience on the job. There was no other way that music was created. You had to have musicians. So where I grew up, there was a local corner bar that always had a live band. There was always a Holiday Inn with a live band. There was always a band playing at the local VFW hall. There were gigs everywhere, right? So that experience was undeniably how I learned and how I got the experience to be able to negotiate different kinds of music, and there was an element of commerce that you don't get in college. Is like, it's that no one wants to talk about it, but hey, you went out to play a gig and you had fun. And you actually got some money and say, hey, I want to do that again. I want to get called back, right? And so you practice hard because you saw that there was this payoff for the hard work. So that's an aside. But the thing about college and curriculum, which is all very fine, and I've certainly learned fair amount. I mean, I got my master's degree, so I'm a person that has gone through, the system, but I think it's hard to simulate the environment of the real world in a college, in a classroom environment, and I think there's just a gap there, a big gap of how students now are unable to get that kind of experience, because it does it's a sort of a sink or swim thing. If you go on a gig and you don't sound, if you suck, you go home and you don't want to do that ever again. Right. So there's no, it's real. It's not, you're not coddled. It's not about getting the grade. Right. It's like playing music isn't about getting grades. It's about, there's a certain criteria that is just defined in the world. If it's good, it's good. And if it's, and that's how you get work, right? It's like, it's how you sound. It's not by the grade. No one cares how good of grades you've gotten in school. If you're going to play professionally, no one cares, right? It's all in how you sound. And of course, it's all in how you present yourself. And if you're a good guy, people like to be around you. That helps a lot, right? But school has now replaced the sort of the real life experience. And when I teach, I try to think in terms of like getting that real world experience, like trying to figure out ways to to simulate those environments, right, is something that is a challenge in music education now, because it's all in the confines of the classroom, and it's not enough.
There's just not enough gigs out there.
Not enough gigs, right? There's the idea of going on a little house party, something, people hired bands for their parties, right? You played bossa novas, you played swing tunes, you play all kinds of music, right? Now they put on their, their iPod or whatever, streaming. So those gigs were so essential in learning how to negotiate the music, right? You got your ass kicked, and it was fun, and you wanted to do more. That's how I learned. That's how most of my colleagues learned. College was great because you were among like-minded people, and so a lot of those people that I work for and work with to this day. So it's very important as far as relationships. And believe me, I think it's great that there's all these programs available, and I'm very much part of it. But as I tell most of the kids when I go out to do a clinic, it's there's not anybody that you've ever heard that's great, that became great because of school, right? It might have been part of it, might have been helpful, right? But it wasn't because of school. It was because of their own personal initiative and commitment, and learning it, going after the music, and the experience of knowing what you have to practice comes with those real life experiences of going on a gig and going, oh wow, I got to figure out how to do that. I got to do that. I'm out of tune there. I'm rushing. These things become apparent when you're thrown into the fire.
We know that you've been experimenting with musical equipment, especially mouthpieces and necks, saxophone necks. You've been involved with a mouthpiece company called Retro Revival. Could you talk about this?
Sure, I'd love to. My interest in there's guys that are that have a couple of mouthpieces or one mouthpiece, and they've played their entire life, and that's all they care about, and they play great, and that's what they do. For me, I was always interested in it. I was always, when I heard a great player play, I said, "What's he playing?" And sometimes I would actually go, "Hey, yeah, you sound great. Can I try your setup? I'd like to see what that feels like, because I love I love the way they sounded." And so that informed me. It's oh, I see. Man, it's to get that sound, it's more resistant, it's more less resistant. And for me, it was this I was always interested in this element of the chain of events that created the sound. And so, in I would say the past 10 years, I started to meet people that were, I've always been interested in mouthpiece stuff. I remember sitting down in Dave Gardella's shop in Long Island, and sitting with many different mouthpiece refacers, and just trying to get a mouthpiece that would feel better. It's I would sure like it to do this. But in the past 10, 15 years, I started to get really interested in developing my own mouthpiece. Not necessarily my own name on a mouthpiece, but something that I started to learn more about it. So this a confluence of meeting people led me to develop mouthpieces that were basically replicas of the best mouthpieces that were historically out there. So my partner Joel Peskin and I developed a company with the help of a great mouthpiece technician, craftsman, to develop these mouthpieces that are fantastic. They are, mouthpieces that if you were to go on eBay, like a Meyer Brothers um, uh, Alto mouthpiece could go for anywhere from between $12 and $2,000 for something that really doesn't play very well. Now they're available through our company that are, I think, the real thing, like for affordable price. So now we make many models now. So anyway, it's been very fun for me, exciting. I'm sort of the artistic advisor and make sure that the quality control is there. And anyway, it's been and the neck thing is something that I've learned in the past 5-6 years. How every saxophone players talk about mouthpieces all the time, but it's very much part how the mouthpiece connects to the neck, right? It's like a jet engine or muffler technology. It's like the airflow technology, which is very complicated, like between the mouthpiece and the. So I've learned how a mouthpiece that I have laying in my drawer, like I would think it doesn't play very well, and I would happen to put it on another neck or another horn, another neck, and so this mouthpiece plays great on this neck. Well, it wasn't the mouthpiece; it was the neck. It didn't match, so that rose a lot of questions started popping up. It's like, what's going on here with the neck? So it's like there's an equal amount of variables in the neck, right? And so these things are just I sort of a side hobby for me. It's like it would never replace playing music, but it's sort of like a passion I have about having to diagnose people's problems, because a lot of saxophone players have a lot of problems, and sometimes they develop habits because their equipment isn't working properly. And there's not a lot. It's sort of all over the place. There's not a lot of teachers actually that even know how to fix these problems. They just throw a reed on a mouthpiece, and if you have a reed and a mouthpiece all working correctly on a right neck, a student really can just get excited about playing because they could get a sound easier. If it's a fight to get a sound and it doesn't feel good and it's just a struggle, that's not very it's not fun. If it's not fun, you're not going to want to practice. So that's sort of my main goal about it. It's like it's so the variables are so many and they're all over the place. So I try to diagnose these problems, and by doing that, I've learned like what works and what doesn't work. So I try to help students with their equipment, and of course that led to this mouthpiece company, which has been a lot of fun.
What are some of the upcoming events or plans for the future?
Oh, the future. Just keep trying to get better, play. I just got back from Italy on a tour with Peter Erskine. He's got a band called Dr. And I gotta go to.
What makes up that band?
It's a quartet, DRUM, drum. It's this little clever name for the band, but John Beasley and Ben Sheppard. This time it was Damien Erskine playing bass and myself. And it's really fun for me to do that band. And there's amazing musicians. And June, I got to go to New Zealand and play with John Beasley's Monkestra, which is a very cool band. Playing big band arrangements of Thelonious Monk's music, but the way John writes, it's very, very cool. And I have some other stuff going on in Europe later on this summer, doing a thing, West Side Story with Lee Ritenour and Dave Grusin. And I have a new record that I just recorded and finishing, and that's taking some time right now. I'm excited about that. Just, and then working with other bands and other, hopefully, other projects will continue to come in. You never know.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Bob, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks for inviting me.